as long as you don't go outside, I think you're good with this bill. Like, you won't have any problems with.
Yeah, don't go outside.
Never leave your house.
Don't get TikTok either, right? You're not supposed to have TikTok. They're against that.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
And while we're talking about what's happening in the state capitol, let's check in with our friends from Alabama Arise for their legislative update that they had at the start of the week. And that'll get us going, transition into some other legislation happening in Montgomery. Ben, can you play that for us?
Yes, indeed.
Hi, my name is Akeisha Anderson, and I serve as Policy and Advocacy Director for Alabama Arise. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about what happened at the Alabama State House last week, the week of May 8th. So last week, there were several pieces of legislation that moved, some pieces that we are concerned about, some pieces that we are excited about. So we will begin with the bad news. So last week in the Senate, two pieces of legislation that have the ability to advance this seemingly goal of defunding public education did advance through committee. So SB 202, which is the PRICE Act, has the ability to divert about $600 million out of the Education Trust Fund by giving parents money to essentially send their children to schools alternatives other than public schools. And so that is a piece of legislation that Alabama Arise is closely watching and is in opposition to. Similarly, the Alabama Accountability Act, which was passed years ago, is back before the legislature, this time seeking to be amended to raise the cap by about $20 million of the amount of money that can possibly be spent under this act. So that is a total of about $620 million that could possibly be diverted out of the Education Trust Fund to parents, enabling them to send their children to schools other than public schools. And so those are pieces of legislation that Arise is very concerned about and that we are closely monitoring as well as we are opposing. On the brighter side, there was some good news this past week. So several pieces of legislation related to criminal justice reform were either up in committee this past week or slated to be voted on this past week. So let's start with SB 154, which is the driver's license bill. This piece of legislation was slated to be voted on Thursday. Unfortunately, the legislature adjourned right before getting to this bill, but the good news is it is slated to be voted on Tuesday of this week. So hopefully within just a few days, a few hours, the driver's license legislation will become law or will pass out of the legislature. So if you don't recall, SB 154 is the piece of legislation that will stop the automatic practice of suspending driver's licenses for unpaid traffic tickets, fines, and fees. And so that is something that Alabama Arise is in support of. That is something that we are closely monitoring and that we hope to see get over the finish line this week. Another really good piece of criminal justice legislation, HB 229, is a second chance bill for short. And this is a piece of legislation that will allow people that have been sentenced to life without parole under our 3 strikes law to have the ability to petition a court to be resentenced for a shorter amount of time. So that means that many people, hundreds of people that are serving life in prison, which is the second worst consequence other than the death penalty, these people will have the chance to possibly be resentenced for time served or, for have the ability to serve less time and prove that we are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. So these are pieces of legislation that we are excited about. We hope to see them continue to move. And as they move, we will continue to keep you posted and updated on them. So if you do not already, please be sure to make sure that you pay attention to our bills of interest on our website. You can find that at alarise.org. And please pay attention to our action alerts and help us contact legislators throughout the week, just on a host of different issues. So thank you so much. Take care.
All right, y'all. Yeah, I really appreciate the work Alabama Rise is doing. Definitely check out their bills of interest section on their website. It's a great way to monitor the legislation. So we're going to talk about a couple bills here. I've got a couple. Tahirih's got some really startling information about a bill that's passing through the legislature. I do want to shout out Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice for their work to end debt-based driver's license suspensions, which impacts too many of our fellow working people. As you heard there is a bill that's going to address that. And I think there's good news on that, right?
Yes. So SB 154 has officially passed both houses, and the Senate has even done their concurrence.
Nice.
So it is now headed to the governor's desk for signature.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you all to contact your state rep and senator, but that has already passed through. That is great.
So contact Ivy. Contact Ivy's office and let her know you support this legislation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hit up the governor. Let her know her signature is needed for that bill. I think it's a very important bill because Alabama has been suspending the driver's license of anyone who cannot afford to pay a traffic ticket or anyone who misses a court hearing.
And that includes not just criminal court.
Right.
Importantly. So that also includes civil cases. That also includes things like child support or child supervision hearings. Now, if you are somebody who cannot afford to pay your child support and you're getting pulled over and you find out your license has been suspended and your car is getting towed and you have another ticket you've got to take care of, how are you now supposed to get to work and how are you supposed to afford that care? How are you supposed to afford that support?
Yeah,
if you can't work, if you can't get to work, how are you supposed to take care of these fees?
Yeah, we've got to the point where we can't even exist to feed the machine at a certain point because they won't let people out of jail long enough to work.
Yeah.
Feed the machine that they
because
created.
Extraction is their primary objective.
Right.
That extraction is their primary objective.
Right. And you know, how is this keeping people safer to take their driver's license away over a missed traffic ticket or, you know, unpaid child support, unpaid civil court fees? It's taking away people's legal right to operate a vehicle in a state like Alabama where we have no public transportation really of any significance.
I think Arise now has their transport coalition. And they estimate that something like 16% of Alabamians do not have access to regular transportation. Wow.
And I bet you if you take a look at that 16% and then look at the poverty rate in the state, there's going to be a lot of crossover there, right? Because It's so difficult to survive in Alabama without transportation. And that's why public transportation is such a critical need in our state. And it's why, you know, backwards policies like this of taking away 170,000 people their driver's license, 170,000 people. That's a lot of people. And 95% of all suspended licenses in the state are because of unpaid traffic ticket debt, not because of driving, you know, malfeasance, not because they did something wrong on the roads and are like an unsafe driver. No, it's because they have debt. So that is good news. I'm actually glad to hear the good news that this bill has passed both chambers. It's headed to the governor. So hit up the governor, let her know you want that signed. Good to see a little bit of progress. From a good bill back to a bad one, though, HB 209 is still working its way through the legislature. This is the bill that would criminalize assistance with absentee voting. I put out a statement with the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition recently asking all union brothers and sisters to join me in opposing this bill, which is anti-democratic voter suppression based on an imaginary problem. And we should not risk a felony by helping people exercise their rights. Really hoping this bill can be defeated, and I appreciate the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, League of Women Voters Alabama, and everyone else who's been fighting this terrible legislation. And there is a public hearing on Tuesday, May 23rd, so there's still time to stop this bad bill. And then there's, did you have an update on the voting rights bill?
I just wanted to say I want people to understand that this voting rights bill criminalizes even simply taking a sealed stamp envelope and putting it in a mailbox for somebody else.
It is wild. I mean, a piece of paper can become illegal under this act. Helping people, giving someone a ride.
Helping someone read the form.
And I think if you missed our interview a week or two back, we talked to someone from Faith in Action, Alabama, and we also talked to a student at the University of Alabama about how this would criminalize the work they're doing. And the gentleman from Faith in Action, Alabama, Mr. Clark, he had a great point that at the end of the day, this is criminalizing helping people. And since when should we ever do that? So definitely calling on folks to join me in opposing HB 209. We've got to protect our right to vote, folks. But there's more bad legislation, unfortunately. There's the anti-loitering bill, which would further criminalize homeless folks and other things. So you've got some updates there.
So I have actually been in the State House talking to some legislators about HB 24. I have been emailing committees to talk about HB 24. So what HB 24 does is it amends the existing public loitering statute, which is already unconstitutional, by the way, because it criminalizes panhandling. So people who are in public rights of way and are actively soliciting for money. Right? That's panhandling. What HB 24 does is take the panhandling component out of the bill and allows officers to arrest people just because they exist in a public right of way.
Wow.
That means your right to picket.
Right.
If you're blocking a sidewalk, if you are blocking an entrance, that is a reason to arrest you for loitering. If you are in a protest and you're participating in a march, if you're exercising your First Amendment rights, that's a reason to pick you up. If you are unsheltered and you are just trying to sit in the shade for a little while and minding your own business, that is a reason to pick you up and take you to jail.
That is just wild. I mean, and it kind of reminds me of the anti-riot bill we were dealing with last year that thankfully failed. And here's yet another attempt to criminalize protest and freedom of assembly, while also targeting, you know, the most marginalized folks in our community, the folks who are without any shelter, right?
And I want to make it clear, the lawmakers who are introducing this bill and pushing this bill through know that it's unconstitutional. They've been told it's unconstitutional. They want that fight. Right.
They want to spend your tax dollars fighting this out in the courts. And, you know, as we've talked about on the show before, Alabama legislators have never been deterred by the constitutionality of their own legislation. And I think that's a good point that, you know, in some cases they welcome that fight and they want to bring it to the courts. They want to be on TV, right? They want to be on WVNN, right-wing radio. They want to be in right-wing media, glowing up about this, you know, this fight that they're taking to the courts, all to hurt people. To hurt people. It's a mean-spirited piece of legislation.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned, I was looking at the comments, but if you're wearing a mask and you are congregating in a public place or loiter or remain in a public place, you can be under this law, I guess, arrested or so. So that's interesting. Masks are pretty common these days. And just being in public in a mask should not be in the law here.
Right.
I don't think.
And so I want to point out this is why the work that we've been doing on SB 13 is so important. HB 13, sorry, excuse me. Let me get the bill number right, which is our summons in lieu of arrest bill.
Okay.
We want to make sure that whenever we can let people go with simply a summons and not have to put them under custodial arrest, that is what officers are doing. We do not need to keep filling up our jail. So I find it really interesting that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing when it comes to these kinds of policies, right? Because HB 13 is driven by police, actually. It's driven by the jails who know that we are filling up, who know that we are unnecessarily arresting people.
Right, they can't handle
and don't want the escalation.
Right.
They don't want the cost to the taxpayers of keeping these people incarcerated for nothing.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that you can't wear a mask and gather in a public place. You know, well, why might you wear a mask? Well, you could wear a mask because you're worried about disease, right? We just went through a pandemic. Or you could be wearing a mask just because of the hell of it, right? Because you can, because you're in America and you should be able to wear a mask if you want to wear a mask.
Because we're in the middle of pollen season.
Right. We're in pollen season. I have terrible allergies, okay? I'm not the only one. Why else would you wear a mask? Well, I don't know. Maybe if you're at a demonstration of some kind, particularly in a place like Alabama, and you're on the more progressive side of things, well, there might be some folks on the other side of the aisle documenting you being there to try to dox you, to try to get you terminated at your job. There could be, you know, far-right lunatics who do monitor protests and gatherings to document left-wing activists. That's a real phenomena. That really happens. And so there are plenty of reasons why someone might want to wear a mask and gather in a public place. And it's just, it's anti-freedom.
Yeah, and I've got the bill pulled up here. And some of the defenders will say, well, they're giving tools to law enforcement to help people off the street. And there is a section that specifically says an officer may instruct any person in violation of the subdivision to peaceably exit. And they may drive them to a shelter if they feel like it. I guess they can still arrest them as well.
They may or may not.
They may arrest them. And then
they may ruin your life. They may help you.
Gotta protect that officer discretion, man.
I guess before this law, they didn't have the option to help you at all, apparently. So I'm glad they codified it that a cop may not have to arrest you for this stuff. But and the other one I wanted to mention was they will not. One section of the bill: no person shall stand in the roadway or in the purpose of soliciting a ride. So no hitchhiking. Don't try and get around for free. I mean, of course, it is dangerous to be on a highway or any street, but this covers a lot of places that are just public places, public roadways. And so that's also going to be under this bill as well. So,
as Adam says, a lot of that is reflected from the failed riot legislation last year, I think.
Yeah, they were just working on this stuff, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They changed strategies, I guess. They went from going after rioters to going after the homeless and panhandlers to try to accomplish some of the same goals. It's really shameful. And again, I see it as an attack on freedom. And these are so-called small government folks. These are folks who say, don't tread on me. Don't tread on me unless... Right?
You're wearing a mask on the sidewalk.
And I just want to point out...
you get treaded, apparently.
Another little nugget about HB 24 and how HB 24 is becoming law. So HB 24 was introduced by Representative Reed Ingram, and he got it sent to his committee, County and Municipal Governments, instead of the judiciary, because he chairs the committee for county and municipal governments.
How convenient.
That's a lot easier.
So it's a lot easier to get your bill on the agenda and get that favorable report and get that vote out when you control the committee.
Right.
And when the Rules Committee gets to decide behind closed doors what goes where.
Right. Right. Even if it has nothing to do really with your committee, even if it's not the appropriate place. Wow. Well, thanks for that little nugget.
And even if, again, I've been working specifically on this bill. I have talked to every legislator on the committee. I've emailed every legislator on those committees to say, this is a bad bill. This is an unconstitutional bill.
And
no response.
Oh,
I can't imagine how any of it, or a vast majority of it, can be constitutional.
Well,
honestly, it's like
we say that,
so
but the way things are going in this country, nothing would surprise me coming out of our court system these days. So.
And they bring up sodomy multiple times in this, just so y'all know.
Wow.
Again with that theme, right?
Interesting. Like, I don't know how that's related, but there
it's
you go.
soliciting prostitution or sodomy, which is a very ancient term.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's like they just wanted to shoehorn in that
so
one.
if they can target more people.
That's very interesting because, of course, our sodomy laws have also largely been judged unconstitutional because they target people with same-sex attraction.
Yeah, so here it is, the don't tread on me, small government, pro-freedom Republicans attacking your rights to exist, your rights to travel.
As long as you don't go outside, I think you're good with this bill. Like, you won't have any problems with this bill.
Yeah, don't go outside.
Never leave your house.
Don't get TikTok either, right? You're not supposed to have TikTok. They're against that because it's Chinese. Really, it's... the last bill I had before we get to some education stuff is SB 242, and this is the Landlord-Tenant Act. It would amend the Landlord-Tenant Act to remove the cap on security deposits, which is bad news for tenants.
And Alabama already has some of the weakest tenant protections in the country.
Absolutely. Very weak protections for tenants. And here's one of the very few is that there is a cap on security deposits, and they want to get rid of that. They want to protect their precious landlords. Their sweet little landlords that they have to protect.
Who aren't even based in Alabama. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the private equity from Nashville, from Atlanta, from Chicago, New York that is bringing dollars in and sweeping up private residential housing to rent it back out to us. So none of that wealth is actually benefiting the community.
Right. And you've got like Blackstone and you've got these mega corporations and big finance that is buying up housing, out-of-state investors coming in. And we're seeing that a lot in Huntsville. And you know, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that when we get to Huntsville stuff. But that's bad news. Really just interesting that that's going to be your priority, to remove security deposit caps for tenants. I don't know. I guess those legislators feel they were elected to protect landlords. Just quite the shame.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.